I know Prime Video's series Fallout has been on a lot of people's radar, and while this is based on a video game series, does the show explain the world enough and provide a story that those of us who have never played the game can enjoy it? In a future post-apocalyptic Los Angeles brought about by nuclear decimation, citizens must live in underground bunkers to protect themselves from radiation, mutants, and bandits. This is a beautiful, futuristic retro aesthetic to the entire set design. The beginning of the nuclear fallout begins in like 2077, but looks and feels way more like the 1950s. TVs are round and black and white. Cars are from that era. And yet this is set way into a time we haven't even reached yet. Now the main stars of this are Ella Purnell, Walton Goggins, and Aaron Moten. And they each have wildly different roles and backgrounds, creating three contrasting perspectives for the world. Ella Purnell is a vault dweller. She's grown up underground in an impenetrable vault, or maybe a bunker, to shield her and those with her from the radiation on the surface. And because of an incident, Purnell's Lucy leaves the vault and travels to the surface. Now her portrayal is brilliant as her naivete is stripped away slowly by ongoing discoveries of life on the surface. She's innocent and pure, and starts off wide-eyed and hopeful, positive, and just ready to tackle her mission. But through the course of discovery, her worldview shifts, and watching her navigate these new realities I thought was both engaging and entertaining. Now Aaron Moten plays Maximus, this man who is part of this warrior monk sort of collective called the Brotherhood. They're paramilitary, but don't lack any of the bravado and machismo of an actual military regiment. Maximus also has his worldview challenged, and Moten expertly conveys the hubris and disillusionment that his character experiences. Then there's Walton Goggins, playing what's called the Ghoul. He's sort of skeleton-y looking, missing a nose and then having these sunken eye sockets. But it's not the makeup that creates the impressive persona. Goggins carries a great deal of menace as this gunslinging human shell. He's snarky, calculated, vengeful, but also just, creating a character that can be both bounty hunter, judge, and jury. And the way his story interweaves through the larger narrative adds so much depth and detail to the intrigue that eventually comes to light. Now for me, the beginning of the series, it was a rough start. There are harsh and abrupt scene changes that take us to new locations or characters without any context of when or where they are. And because the settings are so vastly different, I couldn't tell if what we were being shown was flashback or something that was happening simultaneously with the other scenes that we just witnessed. Thankfully, the transitions smooth out after the first episode or so, and the story then begins to gel more. Now maybe if you have played the video games, you'll know all of the lore and all of the factions, but for anybody who's just entering into this world, it is a little jarring to be tossed around the landscape of the story like we end up being. Now in addition to following the three leads on their separate missions, we are also slowly introduced to a mystery that unfurls starting around episode 4 and involves some of the inhabitants that Lucy left behind. Moises Arias plays her brother, and I love how inquisitive, observant, and suspicious he is. He asks questions that he's not meant to know about, and then he infers things from scenarios he's supposed to be ignorant of. For me, this is when the show really began to become captivating. I mean, yeah, it is kind of a big ask to get to episode 4 out of 8 before everything begins to engage, but I was hopeful that it would start giving us more than just a few people wandering around the wasteland of the surface. And it did. And then speaking of that, it's a good thing we do get mystery because while I really enjoyed Purnell's performance, the MacGuffin that sends her on her quest, it is thin and difficult to buy into. I didn't have any sort of connection with the thing that she's after, so I didn't feel any urgency or even necessity. I mean, I can understand her motivations, but from a viewing standpoint, there wasn't any reason for me to care. But with the inclusion of the mystery angle, the narrative created watchable longevity, and I really started to care about where everything was heading. Now, the latter half of the series introduces a sense of foreboding. The scenes are designed to obscure a bunch of details up front so that as Lucy, or maybe any of the other characters, begin to feel a bit hinky about a situation, but they can't put their finger on why, we get the exact same sense. And the show keeps items from us along with the characters so that as they discover the truth, we do too. And that made the suspense fun and then tense. And I like too that the show incorporates some social commentary, but it's tackled in humorous ways so that it's non-threatening, but still retains effectiveness. It's also not something that's beaten over our heads or shouted at us through megaphones. The messaging is subtle, but still present, especially as it speaks to society, behaviors, or greed. Now, something that surprised me is that we get several cameos and guest appearances throughout the show. I mean, actors you may not expect show up for small scenes or maybe for an episode. And while at first a couple of them felt like they were in there just as a gimmick, really, it's just an expanded cast utilizing all sorts of talent. I mean, some of those that you might recognize are Dale Dickey, Fred Armisen, and Matt Berry. And because this is futuristic and post-apocalyptic, we get some impressive creature designs that hedge on being nightmare fuel. Now, two creatures in particular are wicked in both presentation and ferocity, and one of them gets quite a bit of screen prominence during an episode, building dread and excitement. I think the special effects and the makeup, they are also gruesome, but they're awesome too. Walton Goggins is obviously a standout thanks to how unsettling and threatening his look is. But when we get to see wounds and nasty body stuff, for the most part, it is convincing and gross. Now, there are some times towards the beginning of the series when the effects weren't as impressive, but I'm not sure if my screening copies were 100% finalized or not. So the wonkiness and the lackluster bits just could be the result of being unfinished for me. Now, something else that I think is handled well is the world building from both a visual and storytelling perspective. Visually, having desolate landscapes, it's not that impressive or unique. But the Western-themed shanty towns that we see, along with the random city skeletons that are interspersed throughout the vast nothingness, it does help to create a sense of loneliness and isolation, sometimes even despair. And I appreciate how that helps to shape the entire tone of the narrative. And then, because the background and the development on the lore is built upon each episode, this new world that we watch the characters traverse through, it feels tangible, with each setting just sort of taking on the same mindset or persona as its inhabitants. So while I loved the building mystery that eventually comes into play, I don't think the other portion of the story is presented in a way that creates necessity or urgency. Maybe that portion is fine for a video game, as the character just needs to move from point to point to accomplish objectives before moving on to the next checkpoint. But from a series perspective, it's just not that interesting. I am thankful that the characters can be captivating and they take the focus away from the task, but if this was lacking in secrecy and riddles, I think this would lose anybody that's unfamiliar with the game pretty quickly. So overall, Fallout starts off clunky and unsure with its storytelling and transitions, but the characters are unique, nuanced, and engaging. The makeup, set designs, and special effects all help to build the desolate and foreboding post-apocalyptic landscape, complete with abominations and deformities that introduce excitement to the world. And while the impetus for our main characters' journeys and interactions lacked depth and urgency, a growing mystery provides the needed spark to ignite the narrative's appeal. Walton Goggins, Ella Purnell, and Aaron Moten's characters each have standout moments, allowing them to become impactful and indispensable elements of the storytelling. As someone who's not played the games, this became a very enjoyable series, and I'm looking forward to where the show takes us next. There's sex, nudity, a lot of profanity, and a ton of violence. I give Fallout 4 out of 5 couches. If you're familiar with the game, what do you hope to see in the show? And if you haven't played this video game, what's a post-apocalyptic show or maybe movie that you'd like to watch? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.